Eleanor Vance watched Arthur from across their meticulously appointed Denver kitchen, the clink of his expensive watch against the marble counter a discordant note in the morning silence. 15 years she'd poured into their pharmaceutical empire, every detail known to her, yet his charming smile no longer reached his eyes, nor explained the faint, unfamiliar scent clinging to his silk pajamas. He dismissed her quiet query about the latest quarterly report with a wave, a casual arrogance that had begun to feel less like confidence and more like a carefully constructed wall. And behind that wall, she was certain, something was beginning to rot. Eleanor Vance watched Arthur Thorne from across their sprawling Denver breakfast nook, the morning light glinting off the crystal glasses and polished silver, yet illuminating nothing of the man she had married. 15 years. 15 years she had meticulously, silently, built Thorne Pharmaceuticals into a formidable distribution giant. Her fingerprints were on every operational success, her intellect streamlining every process, transforming nascent ideas into thriving market share. Yet, to Arthur, she was merely the impeccably dressed wife who managed their opulent home, a beautiful accessory to his self-proclaimed genius. His laughter, a rich, confident sound that once thrilled her, now carried an unsettling echo, a hollowness that seemed to bounce off the high ceilings of their meticulously curated world. He dabbed his lips with a linen napkin, oblivious to her gaze, a casual arrogance clinging to him like an expensive cologne. Lately, his late nights had become the norm, his explanations vague, punctuated by dismissive smiles. "Just a few minor clerical anomalies, darling," he had chirped earlier that week, waving away her query about an unusual spike in unallocated funds within the quarterly report she'd meticulously reviewed. He hadn't even looked up from his iPad, his fingers scrolling through stock market figures that, in her opinion, were far less critical than the foundational health of their company. "Leave the heavy lifting to me. You handle the aesthetics, I'll handle the actual business." That patronizing tone was becoming a recurring melody in their marriage, a discordant note that grated against her years of dedicated, indispensable work. Sarah moved with a quiet competence that immediately put Eleanor at ease. There were no melodramatic pronouncements, just sharp questions and an assurance of absolute discretion. Within weeks, the truth began to unspool, not with a bang, but with the steady, chilling drip of a leaking faucet. The first revelation was, in its own way, almost expected, yet still a searing wound. Sarah's report, delivered in a leather-bound folder with clinical detachment, contained photographs. Arthur Thorne, her husband of 15 years, caught in intimate moments with Scarlett Hayes, a real estate agent whose glossy promotional photos had occasionally appeared in local luxury magazines. Scarlett, younger, blonder, her laugh a brittle counterpoint to Arthur's smug smile, embodied everything Eleanor was not, or, rather, everything she had carefully chosen not to be, sacrificing superficiality for substance. Eleanor felt a flicker of pain, swiftly overshadowed by a colder, more potent understanding. This wasn't just about infidelity. Arthur, in his staggering arrogance, hadn't even bothered to be discreet, assuming Eleanor was too immersed in her spreadsheets and operational oversight to notice anything beyond the surface. This blatant disregard was a deeper insult than the betrayal itself. But the affair was merely the prelude. The true horror lay nestled deeper within Sarah's meticulously compiled report, highlighted by intricate financial diagrams and scanned bank statements. Arthur Thorne wasn't just unfaithful, he was a meticulously cruel thief. The investigation confirmed Eleanor's deepest fears and then magnified them into a grotesque reality. Arthur had systematically begun siphoning assets from Thorne Pharmaceuticals, the company they had built together, brick by painstaking brick. He was manipulating records, orchestrating complex shell transactions, and artificially deflating the company's valuation, all with a chillingly clear purpose. Sarah's notes pointed out several glaring inconsistencies that, to a trained eye, practically screamed amateur hour, yet Arthur had clearly believed them impervious to scrutiny, especially Eleanor's. He was preparing for a divorce. Not a clean break, but a scorched earth strategy designed to leave Eleanor Vance utterly destitute, stripped of every cent and every shred of her life's work, while he secured millions for himself and, presumably, a new life with Scarlet Hayes. The sheer audacity, the cold-blooded calculation behind it, stole Eleanor's breath. This wasn't the man she married. This was a predatory stranger who had worn her husband's face for years. The initial shock, the sting of personal betrayal, quickly receded, replaced by an icy clarity. The warm, accommodating wife who had meticulously managed their shared empire from the shadows was gone. In her place stood the architect, no longer unseen, but awakened. Her hands, which once arranged intricate data points, now clenched, ready to dismantle the elaborate lie Arthur had constructed. Her resolve solidified, hard and unyielding as granite. Arthur Thorne had underestimated her. He had mistaken her quiet dedication for ignorance, her measured patience for weakness. He had woven a serpent scheme, but he had done so within the walls of her carefully constructed house, and she knew every hidden passage. He believed his tracks were covered, but to Eleanor, they were glaring beacons, shining paths directly to his downfall. The game had begun, and Arthur had no idea he was already caught in a trap of his own making. Eleanor moved through the Thorne mansion like a ghost, her every action calculated, her expression a careful mask of quiet resignation. Arthur, oblivious, thrived on her apparent submission. He reveled in the subtle shift in her demeanor, mistaking her renewed politeness for broken spirit, her meticulous organization for passive acceptance. This was precisely the trap Eleanor had begun to build, brick by patient brick. He would often boast, loudly, on his phone, about streamlining operations and pruning dead weight, his eyes occasionally flicking to Eleanor, a smirk playing on his lips, daring her to comment. She never did, merely offering a tight smile and a nod. This encouraged him, fueling his arrogance. He grew bolder, leaving spreadsheets open on his study desk, filled with thinly veiled asset transfers and inflated expense reports. He was so convinced of his genius, so certain of her lack of comprehension, that his attempts at concealment became increasingly transparent, a joke as a criminal, in progress, just as Eleanor had predicted. The initial steps were taken in absolute secrecy. Through Sarah Jenkins, her private investigator, Eleanor was introduced to Robert Sterling, a forensic accountant whose reputation preceded him as a financial bloodhound. Robert, a quiet man with spectacles perched low on his nose and a mind like a steel trap, had been briefed on Arthur's suspected activities. Their first meeting took place in an anonymous coffee shop, far from the prying eyes of Denver's elite. Eleanor laid out the initial evidence: fragmented bank statements she'd subtly copied, inconsistencies in the company's internal ledger, and Arthur's increasingly lavish, untraceable spending. Robert's eyes, initially cautious, sharpened with a quiet intensity. "He's good," Robert conceded after reviewing the data, "but not good enough. There are patterns. Always patterns." Next came Evelyn Reed, a divorce attorney whose name struck fear into the hearts of unscrupulous spouses across the state. Evelyn was a force of nature, sharp, impeccably dressed, with a no-nonsense gaze that seemed to peel back layers of deceit. Eleanor presented her with Sarah Jenkins' comprehensive report detailing Arthur's affair with Scarlet Hayes and the intricate web of financial fraud. Evelyn's expression remained unreadable, but a faint, almost imperceptible nod indicated her assessment. "Mr. Thorne clearly believes he's outsmarted everyone," Evelyn stated, her voice low and resonant, "especially you, Eleanor. That will be his undoing." Together, the three of them, Eleanor, Robert, and Evelyn, began to weave a comprehensive legal and financial strategy. Robert delved deeper into Thorne Pharmaceuticals' books, painstakingly cross-referencing every transaction, every offshore account, every shell corporation Arthur had so carelessly created. He discovered multiple instances where Arthur had deliberately undervalued company assets and routed profits through private, untraceable channels, anticipating the divorce settlement. Eleanor, under Evelyn's guidance, continued to play her part, offering Arthur no reason to suspect her growing arsenal of evidence. She would casually ask about business trips, feign interest in his new investments, even inquire about how things were going with Scarlett's real estate projects with an air of naive concern, making Arthur believe she was truly clueless about the nature of their relationship. Each innocent question was a strategically placed tripwire, encouraging his overconfidence, pushing him to reveal just a little more. Arthur, inflated by his perceived victory, became more careless. He started hinting at the generous settlement Eleanor would receive, painting himself as the benevolent party, entirely unaware that Eleanor's team was meticulously documenting every word, every lie, every arrogant misstep. They were building a case not just for financial restitution, but for total vindication, designed to expose Arthur Thorne's incompetence and depravity in the most public and humiliating way possible. The stage was being set for his grand, spectacular fall. Eleanor, the quiet architect, waited. The austere grandeur of the Denver courtroom seemed to amplify Arthur Thorne's self-assured stride. He entered as if a king surveying his domain, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips as his gaze swept past Eleanor, who sat beside Evelyn Reed, a picture of quiet composure. He took the stand, radiating an unshakable confidence, his tailored suit a testament to the wealth he believed he was cleverly preserving. "Mr. Thorne, can you confirm for the court the financial health of Thorne Pharmaceuticals at the time these divorce proceedings commenced?" Arthur's attorney, a sleek man named Sterling, began, his voice smooth as polished stone. Arthur leaned into the microphone, his voice resonating with cultivated authority. "Thorne Pharmaceuticals, while a respected name, has faced significant market headwinds. As I've stated repeatedly, its valuation has, regrettably, decreased. My wife, with all due respect, simply lacks the nuanced understanding of the modern pharmaceutical distribution landscape to grasp the complexities." He glanced at Eleanor, a condescending pity in his eyes. The implication was clear. Eleanor was an amateur, an emotional woman incapable of understanding real business. His arrogance was a palpable thing, a cloak he wore with pride, believing his fabricated narrative was impenetrable. He proceeded to present a series of doctored reports, his testimony a carefully constructed tapestry of half-truths and outright lies, all designed to paint the company as a dwindling asset, barely worth the paper its dwindling profits were printed on. Each falsified number, each deceptive explanation, was delivered with a theatrical flourish, cementing his conviction that he was utterly untouchable. Then, Evelyn Reed rose, her presence commanding immediate attention. She approached the podium, her movements precise, her eyes, like Eleanor's, holding an unreadable depth. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice calm, a stark contrast to Arthur's earlier bombast. "You've testified that the company's revenue has declined due to market headwinds. Can you explain why, then, your personal assets have seen a significant, indeed, unprecedented surge during the same period?" "So, you'd be intimately familiar with every significant expenditure, every large transfer of funds?" Evelyn pressed, her voice unwavering. Arthur scoffed. "Naturally. It's my company." "Good," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerous softness. "Then perhaps you can explain Exhibit C, specifically, page 4. A hush fell over the courtroom. Arthur's confident posture stiffened. His eyes darted to Sterling, who was suddenly rifling through his notes with a frantic urgency. The color visibly drained from Arthur's face. The casual ease, the cultivated charm, vanished. He swallowed hard, his atoms apple-bobbing. "Exhibit C, page 4, he repeated, a tremor in his voice. It was the first time he had sounded unsure, the first crack in his meticulously constructed facade. Evelyn held up a document. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. This is an internal ledger from Thorne Pharmaceuticals, dated 6 months ago. On page 4, there's a wire transfer sum of $2 million diverted from a company acquisition fund directly into an offshore account registered to a shell corporation. A shell corporation, by the way, that our investigators have directly linked to you and Ms. Scarlett Hayes. Furthermore, there's a handwritten note, initialed AT, explicitly stating, "Secure future, dispose of dead weight." Would you care to elaborate on the nature of this transaction, Mr. Thorne? Or perhaps clarify who this dead weight might refer to? The silence was deafening, punctuated only by Arthur's ragged breath. His eyes, now wide with panic, darted to Eleanor, then back to the damning page. His face, once smug and ruddy, was now a pale, mottled mess. The carefully constructed web of lies, his entire fraudulent empire, was not merely unraveling, it was being incinerated, publicly, on Exhibit C, page 4. He stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, no coherent words emerging. His grand, overconfident performance had ended, replaced by the raw, humiliating spectacle of a man caught in his own amateurish trap. The courtroom air, thick with the scent of stale coffee and crushed ambition, hummed with a stunned silence after Arthur's desperate, guttural cries. His face, still blotchy and contorted, seemed to reflect the chaotic unraveling of his meticulously crafted facade. Judge Blackwood, her expression a mask of stern disapproval, allowed the silence to linger, an unspoken condemnation. Then, with a curt nod, she motioned for Robert Sterling, the forensic accountant, to approach the stand. Sterling, precise and unassuming, took his place. He spoke not with the dramatic flair of a lawyer, but with the cold, irrefutable logic of numbers. His voice, calm and measured, meticulously detailed Arthur Thorne's systematic pilfering, painting a picture of deception that was both intricate in its scope and shockingly crude in its execution. He presented flowcharts and spreadsheets, projected onto large screens, showing how shell corporations like Viridian Logistics, a name Arthur had once dismissed as Eleanor's obsession with paperwork, were used to funnel legitimate company profits into personal accounts. He highlighted inflated expense reports, phantom employees, and deliberately undervalued assets. The defendant's strategy, Your Honor, Sterling concluded, his gaze briefly meeting Arthur's, was not just to divest his wife, but to systematically gut Vance and Thorne Pharmaceuticals for personal gain, leaving a hollowed shell for any rightful owner. The sheer amateurishness of some of Arthur's digital breadcrumbs, which he'd clearly believed were erased, elicited a few gasps from the gallery. He had assumed his wife, the meticulous administrator, wouldn't look beyond the top-line numbers, underestimating her capacity to delve into the very foundations of the business they built. Next, Dr. Victoria Cross, the court-appointed auditor, ascended. Her testimony was even more devastating. Independent and unbiased, she corroborated Sterling's findings, her expert analysis leaving no room for doubt. She presented her own valuation of Vance and Thorne Pharmaceuticals, a figure dwarfing Arthur's fraudulent declaration by a staggering factor. The true net worth, she explained, was not the paltry sum Arthur claimed, but a multi-million-dollar enterprise poised for significant growth, thanks in no small part to Eleanor's consistent, quiet stewardship over the past 15 years. Dr. Cross systematically dismantled every lie, every manipulated ledger, every concealed asset Arthur had so arrogantly paraded as truth, exposing them as the flimsy deceptions of a man who believed himself smarter than everyone else. Arthur, now slumped in his seat, looked like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar, magnified by the devastating scale of his crimes. The raw fear in his eyes was not just of losing face, but of losing everything. His once smooth, patrician features were now a roadmap of panic and despair. Judge Blackwood's gaze swept across the courtroom, lingering on Arthur's defeated form. Her voice, when it came, was a hammer blow. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her tone devoid of all patience, "the evidence presented today is not merely compelling, it is overwhelmingly damning. Your deliberate and calculated efforts to defraud your spouse, to systematically plunder the company you jointly built, and to perjure yourself before this court represent a profound betrayal of trust and an egregious affront to justice." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. "Therefore," the judge continued, her voice rising with a controlled fury, "this court finds in favor of Ms. Eleanor Vance on all counts. Ms. Vance is hereby awarded a punitive 70% of all marital assets, a sum that explicitly includes full ownership and absolute control of Vance and Thorne Pharmaceuticals, effective immediately. A collective gasp, then a wave of hushed whispers, rippled through the gallery. Arthur flinched as if struck. Furthermore, Judge Blackwood pressed on, her eyes fixed on Arthur. "You, Mr. Arthur Thorne, are ordered to return all fraudulently acquired funds to the company, pay all legal fees incurred by Ms. Vance, and face immediate forfeiture of any assets traceable to your illicit activities. Given the egregious nature and scope of the financial crimes uncovered, this court finds it imperative to refer your case to the District Attorney's Office for full criminal prosecution. Bail is revoked. You will be taken into custody immediately." The words hung in the air, cold and final. Arthur's face went utterly ashen, the last vestiges of his bravado crumbling. He swallowed hard, his eyes wide and vacant, the once confident gleam replaced by a deep, visceral terror. His empire, his carefully constructed life of deceit, had not merely been dismantled, it had been utterly obliterated. The joke, it turned out, was entirely on him. With Arthur Thorne's public humiliation complete and his empire reduced to rubble, Eleanor Vance stepped into the void, not with a flourish, but with the quiet, determined efficiency that had always been her hallmark. Within weeks, she had assumed full leadership of Vance and Thorne Pharmaceuticals, immediately dropping the disgraced Thorne name and rebranding it simply as Vance Pharmaceuticals. The transition was seamless, a testament to Eleanor's intimate knowledge of every operational detail, a knowledge Arthur had always dismissed as mere clerical work. Her first acts were swift and decisive. She implemented transparent financial reporting, established new ethical sourcing guidelines, and personally addressed every employee, rebuilding trust that Arthur's avarice had eroded. Clara, her loyal assistant, was promoted, becoming a linchpin in the revitalized structure. Under Eleanor's meticulous guidance, the company didn't just recover, it soared. Her strategic acumen, honed by years of quietly observing Arthur's blunders and calculating improvements, now had free rein. She negotiated lucrative new contracts, expanded into burgeoning markets in preventative care, and invested heavily in research and development that Arthur had always deemed unnecessary overhead. Revenue streams diversified, profits quadrupled within the first year, and employee morale, once stifled by Arthur's toxic arrogance, blossomed under Eleanor's fair and intelligent leadership. The pharmaceutical world watched in awe as the quiet wife, once thought to be a mere appendage to her charismatic husband, transformed a near-bankrupt enterprise into a thriving, ethical industry leader. She wasn't merely managing, she was innovating, building a legacy far grander than Arthur could ever have conceived. Meanwhile, Arthur Thorne's descent was as spectacular as his rise had been deceitful. The district attorney, emboldened by Judge Blackwood's referral and Evelyn Reed's ironclad case, swiftly pressed criminal charges. The man who had once glided through Denver's elite circles with a smirk and a condescending joke was now a federal inmate. Convicted of multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and perjury, Arthur received a multi-year prison sentence, a stark cage for a man who believed himself above all consequence. His reputation, once meticulously polished, was now irrevocably shattered, a byword for corporate malfeasance. Every article, every news report, detailed his meticulously sloppy fraud, the joke of a criminal exposed in humiliating detail. Upon his eventual release, he would face a lifetime of court-ordered financial restitution, forced to work and pay back every penny he had stolen, his once substantial assets entirely liquidated to satisfy the judgment. The grand life he had envisioned, built on lies and betrayal, evaporated like smoke, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of his own hubris. Scarlet Hayes, Arthur's opportunistic mistress, did not escape the fallout. Her complicity in the fraudulent transactions, however minor, led to legal consequences and an immediate termination of her real estate license. Her once promising career crumbled, her name synonymous with scandal. The luxurious lifestyle she had coveted, the promise of wealth and status that Arthur had dangled before her vanished. She found herself ostracized, financially ruined, a cautionary tale of misguided ambition. Eleanor Vance, however, stood triumphant, not just as a survivor, but as an empress of industry, the architect of her own fate. She had not merely reclaimed what was hers, she had multiplied it, proving that integrity and intelligence were far more potent than deceit and arrogance. Her story became a whispered legend in boardrooms and courtrooms alike, a testament to the quiet strength of a woman underestimated, betrayed, and ultimately, magnificently victorious. She looked out from her new, ethically built empire, a silent, knowing smile playing on her lips. The game was over, and she, the unseen architect, had won.